about the kinds of kids? Is there any, Dr. Sanders said that there doesn't appear to be any substantial racial segregation of drug abuse. Is it in your rural-urban differentiation that seems to be important? Are there any ways in which you can identify more at risk than others?
It's more the availability of drugs rather than the quality of life. Even those people who are socially conscious want to look to the quality of life and some of the socially debilitating kinds of things that are causing the problem. It's more drug prevalence, and that is an indicator of drug abuse. If you have a community that has very little drugs and their alcohol is controlled, that doesn't eliminate cigarettes because you can get them in any drugstore out of a machine. But prevalence is some indicator as to abuse and prevalence of abuse.
Well, the frequent users are more overrepresented in minorities. The last data, 79-80, shows that among high school seniors in high school, whites are using drugs more frequently than blacks, and that's different. But the catch there is that there are more blacks who have dropped out of school. So, and we're very, very certain that anybody who drops out of school, black or white or Hispanic, is going to have a lot more drug use than somebody who's in school.
Generally speaking, it does correlate that way.
For sure. The kids who are not using drugs are kids with a religious commitment and with a strong commitment to go on for more education. That seems to be the trends, at least identified in the NIDA data. Kids at some kind of psychological risk, that is living in one-parent families, not feeling good about themselves, are also at much higher risk of getting some problem from this social use of intoxicants.
There's been a lot of research. I think the drug abuse field has matured in the last 20 years. There's a lot of research that some of it is culminated in 7 high-risk characteristics of socially and culturally deprived individuals. And a lot of it was done by prevention and intervention people in trying to get a handle on just how we can maybe cut some of this off at the pass. And the 7 high-risk characteristics indicate that people who have low identification with role models, who drop out of school, who have no responsibility for the family or in the family. The family is dissipated. I think we all know that. Researchers are constantly holding up the fact that our agrarian society has turned into an urban society, and as a consequence, the extended family no longer exists and is dissipated. And some of these are some of the social factors responsible for some of the problems we're experiencing, as well as people having high faith in miracle solutions to problems. I think the television supports people's contention in terms of the games and the gambling and just a whole aura of risk characteristics, which, well, the last 3 are people who have low systemic skills, have not identified and learned to deal with the system, people who have judgmental skills who are not well developed. That research has culminated in identifying those high-risk individuals, and they generally fit into those 7 categories.
I suppose along those lines, I remember a television program I saw some years ago. The bulk of the program I don't remember, but I do remember one line from it in which a man concerned with the rehabilitation process was talking to an actor playing the part of a drug abuser, an addict, and said to him, "What disease are you trying to cure?" And it occurs to me that the kinds of things that Mr. Abdullah has been saying suggest that people who use drugs may be trying to treat something that way. I wonder if is that an appropriate way to start trying to think about it?
I think Edson A is eminently qualified. He's got his hand on the pulse of research, and research there's got to be some biological factors that underlie addiction. I don't think we've ever put our finger on it. And I think the 80s offer some prospect of putting our finger on it. There's some research with the amino acids and the polypeptides and endorphins and some things that are coming out that we've never been able to really define the addictive process in a sense of all these.
I want to find out about this question of the biological components of the addictive process, but I was interested in what Mr. Abdullah was saying about the 7 characteristics of drug abusers, and it does suggest that people who abuse drugs according to that pattern do feel themselves somehow inadequate or unhappy with themselves, and think that drugs is going to help that problem. Is that right? Is that typical of people who abuse drugs? That they're trying to treat a problem with a drug of some kind?
I think there's no question that that is one reason why many people abuse drugs. That for many people there's a lot of stress in their lives. There is a lot of depression in their lives. There's a certain sense of unfulfillment of self, certain sense of unfulfillment of one's potential. And without question, there is very definitely an absence of a strong personal relationship or a series of personal relationships in an individual's lives, all of which come together and are contributory in terms of why a person utilizes drugs. But I wanted to stretch out on that point for a moment, if I will. And that is that in Dr. Sameh's initial comments, he made reference to when he made a response around drug abuse, he included alcohol abuse, and he also included nicotine abuse. You didn't put it in those terms, but I think that that is useful to keep in mind, because in every country, in every culture, in every historical period of time, there has always been a drug of acceptance and a drug of rejection in a given society. In our society, the drug of acceptance is alcohol. And not only that, but the usage of alcohol is portrayed in a very romantic and glamorous type fashion on television shows and movies and advertisements to give an impression that it is cool to use alcohol. The same thing exists with respect to cigarettes, and in many instances the same thing exists with respect to drug abuse. There are many reasons why people utilize drugs, and we have to be very careful about assigning generalizations that apply to everybody in terms of why each individual utilizes drugs. There are many reasons, because there are many different kinds of drug abusers as well. In the same way that stereotypes exist with respect to any type of person or discipline or profession, there are stereotypes with respect to what people conceptualize the average drug abuser to be. Most people now probably think of the average drug abuser in terms of a young person, probably black or minority, probably out of work. To a great extent, that is true, but you have to be careful about how far you generalize that to be, because most of the data that supports that is based upon data that is derived from people in captive populations, people who are in drug abuse programs, people who are in the penitentiary, so that you don't always hear what you need to hear about, for example, the middle-class suburban housewife who is abusing her Valiums or her Libriums to make it through the day. And I just think that needs to be kept in mind to further avoid these stereotype notions of what the average drug abuser is today in American society.
And I think your point about the difficulty of simply getting the basic data on some of these facts is also one that we need to remember too, that we never are quite sure of all the facts, but to the extent that we do have some facts, we can talk about it.
The federal government's institutes on alcohol and drug abuse have done a very, very fine job of